I kind of want to segue into this other topic that, again, I've been wanting to speak to someone like yourself about, is this idea of growth hormone. And
Mhm.
one thing I've been talking about recently, because it comes up a lot in my consultations, and I started using it myself about 6 months ago. At first, I wasn't consistent with it because it was a pain in the ass, but then I got consistent with it. And it's what I'm kind of calling this idea of like the TRT of growth hormone. What's the
Yeah.
using a growth hormone protocol that's not, super physiological bodybuilding amount, but
Yeah.
kind of going, what's the optimal amount of growth hormone that a healthy man can benefit from that's not going to cause side effects, that's going to support health. And at least in Australia and in Europe, I think it would be more common if it wasn't cost prohibitive.
Mm.
But in some of these countries, more so than others, it's definitely a premium, but it's doable for a lot of people.
Mm.
So I guess my kind of question for you is, what kind of person could benefit from augmenting a TRT protocol with optimizing their growth hormone levels? And what types of, starting dosing or average dosing do you kind of see with that?
Another great question. I just from the circumstances of my history, I have dealt with human growth hormone a lot on a lot of levels and to a large extent. So human growth hormone is incredibly beneficial. It's another stigmatized hormone in the United States. It was actually sent into a higher FDA regulatory category so that it can only be prescribed for a very parochial set of circumstances. Again, so the FDA, a non-elected body, has somehow kind of put it into almost a controlled substance type category, but whatever. We'll go into the benefits of it. It was stigmatized. There was again for a lot of these peptides, a lot of these beneficial compounds, we always have to have the alarmist doctors or somebody alarmist from the medical community say, well, it could cause cancer. It may cause cancer. We don't know. So then that scared everybody away from HGH. No evidence that it causes any kind of cancer. It's incredibly beneficial. So if we look at what human growth hormone does, right, and in the evolutionary mechanism of human growth hormone, we can see that, especially in present day, it's very beneficial and it's what we want. And I believe, just like testosterone, certainly at a certain point, everybody should be taking it. Well, not only does it regenerate every organ, let's just say that it regenerates, it stimulates mitogens and for cell proliferation and regeneration of all the organs. You notice it because they say that it makes you look younger, right? And the epidermis is the biggest organ, and it does. It makes your skin actually look better. That's one of the organ functions, but huge benefit. Let's start talking about what most people are looking for when they take HGH, and it's kind of adipose tissue has HGH receptors that forces them into lipolysis. Now, when we have lipolysis, our blood is flowing with triglycerides, free triglycerides, and this attenuates the insulin process, right? So now our body can't use glucose, and we're forced to use our fat stores as a primary source of energy over the glucose in our blood. Now, this process, what we have to think of is we evolved mechanisms to deal with the caveman type days, right? In an environment that did not have a surplus of food. When our bodies first will go through, when we're starving, kind of, right? Our bodies will go through a period of gluconeogenesis where we're actually burning muscle mass or proteins as a primary source of energy over our fat stores. We conserve fat stores as kind of a final source of energy. When this starts happening, after a time, our body will increase human growth hormone, which will then force the energy transfer into using fat stores as a primary source of energy. This is kind of conserve muscle mass and start burning fat. And that's kind of like one of the processes of it. And it's beneficial. Now that we're since the Industrial Revolution and processed foods, and now we're in an environment with superfluous amount of food, infinite amount of food and energy, it's actually preferred. Like, we should be existing in a state where we're using fat stores as a primary source of energy. The problems with metabolic disorder and insulin resistance are just prevalent. So here's the problem now. When we increase the triglycerides in our blood and attenuate the insulin process, now it's easy for our glucose to raise. A lot of people say, oh no, HGH causes diabetes or it causes your glucose to raise. Well, it doesn't cause that. It's a side effect of you switching energy pathways and using your fat stores. Now you're not using the glucose in your blood, so it's easier to build up. So we just have to really watch our diet when we're on HGH. That's it. Long-acting carbs, reduce the amount of carbs, no sugars. Sugars are out. You really have to just improve your diet. to deal with that human growth hormone. But if you can do that, then you have massive benefits from human growth hormone. So we're talking about not only the regeneration of all the organs, but really getting lean and really fine tuning your body. Like I used to tell people, it almost makes you look like you're carved out of marble. Really the subcutaneous fat and everything. So now let's talk about dosages. And here's another problem is that there's too low dosages, and there's really no such thing as too much HGH. Honestly, you really can't take too much. It's not like testosterone. You're not going to take too much and there's going to be adverse side effects. There's no amount that you can take that's too much. So what I always tell people is just take what you can afford. So when we're thinking about a starting dose, and I don't think it makes any sense, it barely makes sense to take 2 IUs per day. That would be like just a replacement dose. And if we're looking for any kind of enhancement, then we need to take more than 2 IUs per day. So I would say start at 3. Even for women, 2 or 3 for women as well. Women do really well on human growth hormone, by the way, really well. I would say, like, if you're looking for any kind of enhancement, 3. If you're just looking for a replacement dose, 2 IUs per day. And then it just goes up from there. It's not like you're going to notice a huge difference from 10 to 20 IU. Well, depending on the person. Some people actually do. But again, take as much as you can afford. That's what I always tell people.
Yeah, that's definitely a factor, isn't it? It's interesting that you bring that up in terms of those dosages, because when I've got a friend, and I'll send this to her, and she showed me that she had one of the most remarkable health transformations that I've ever seen. I mean, you would have thought that she'd had a whole bunch of cosmetic surgeries done. And she took 2 units of HGH in the morning and then again at night, so 4 per day. And combined it with very high dose magnesium. So I think she was using a blend to be able to tolerate very high doses in conjunction with diet and exercise. Almost unrecognizable as a person, like absolutely incredible. And it's definitely the problem with growth hormone, isn't it? That because it's so expensive per unit, you want to get away with taking as little as possible. But what I also tell people is going, well, because you've now got to, pin one extra thing as a daily subcutaneous injection, you don't want to take too little that it's a waste of time, because then that's a real pain in your schedule. So, okay, that's interesting.
Sorry, I apologize. One thing I forgot there is people aren't sure when to take it. When do I take it? We over discussing this a lot with some of the other, my bodybuilder friends that are really in the know and have really seen this a lot. We've kind of come up with probably the best is just 1 bolus at night. Sometimes HGH can make you tired, can cause some fatigue, and it's a hormone, so it can cause some inflammation. That's another thing too. It can cause some inflammation again. And that's also what causes, like, a lot of people complain of wrist numbness, right? And that's just an inflammatory response. And you should be happy that you're getting that, because it means you have good stuff and it's working. But that's another thing that tends to abate over time. If we can just outlast the inflammatory response, the renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system should normalize, and some of those effects should abate. Sometimes it can make you tired, which is why we say just take it at night, take 1 bolus at night. And that's the best methodology we've seen. Now, individual responses, I've seen it wake people up. In that case, I'd switch that person and say, okay, you take it in the morning, because it's obviously having a stimulatory effect for you. Most people, it's the opposite. So start off taking 1 bolus at night, change that if necessary.
So my personal follow-up question for that, which I'd also like to think that other people might have watching this as well. And again, when we spoke before we recorded, I said that the area that I probably know the least about in this field is HGH. And one of the things that, you hear things and you go, is that a myth? Is that just shit that people parrot, or is there substance to that? But kind of touching on what you were saying before about carbohydrates, I'd always heard that you want to take it away from insulin spikes. So if you have someone who, let's say, eats, in the evening, quite close to bedtime, and then maybe does some fasting in the morning until noon or something like that, would it still be beneficial for that individual to take it before bed, or should they take it in the morning?
Yeah, that's a great point. Because of it switches that energy pathway, the spike in glucose may not, the insulin response will be attenuated. So your glucose may go high. So you're right, take it away from when you're eating, when your glucose is going to spike, or the insulin response is going to happen. Yeah, if you eat in the evening and you need to keep it away, and you need to take it at a time more when you're fasting, try that. But also be aware that you may get a little fatigued. And if you do, then maybe changing things around to take that at night to just mitigate the tiredness or fatigue side effect that can occur.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Like one thing I found with pregnenolone, for example, is that like most people find that it makes them tired, but a decent minority of people find it stimulating. So then you've got to find a way to make it work. And, that makes sense to me in terms of being like, well, take it away from the insulin spike. But then if it does make you tired, maybe, eating before you go to bed isn't ideal anyway. So now you have an excuse to kind of change that around anyway. So that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that's very interesting.